So, is everybody interested today? I mean, we're having a little bit different style of meeting, and it should be a lot of fun for even us older people too. So, just a couple of quick notes before we get started. I think we're almost ready, and we're going to be talking both about rocks and fossils today. I don't know how much of each one, but we'll find that out as Jerry goes through everything, Dr. Simmons. So anyways, I just wanted to welcome everyone to our November meeting. This is our regular meeting, and let's go ahead and let's open with a word of prayer. I'll have a couple of short announcements, and I'll introduce Jerry, and then we'll get started.
Lord, we just thank you for this glorious day you've given us. We're thankful that we're able to be here to learn more about your creation, realizing and how great that creation is, how much greater you are to have created this world, this universe, provided means for salvation. And Lord, as we listen to the speaker, open our eyes, our hearts, and our ears to what your word tells us about this wonderful world you've created. So we ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. With that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Jerry, and then we'll get started. So I guess I first became aware of Jerry's ministry, Dr. Jerry Simmons' ministry. I think Paul Feltz was out there visiting about a summer ago, a year and a half ago maybe now, as part of an activity that was taking place in Haviland, Kansas. In the middle of Kansas, I'll let him explain more about that. There's a museum there, and they were hosting several creation groups, and Paul was sort of representing the Front Range for everyone else. Paul's in Northeast Colorado group up in Fort Morgan. And so Jerry, I guess, is the administrator and the director of that ministry. And I'm just going to go ahead and read some details from his bio that we had on the poster that we sent out. He's a scientist and educator. He's coming to share his knowledge about fossils and minerals that he's collected. He's been involved in several digs in this area of the West and other locations in the Front Range, and I think New Mexico recently, if I'm not mistaken, and then plus obviously the High Plains. His presentation is going to focus on the awesome design and beauty of minerals and fossils and explaining how they are astounding evidence for the Lord's creative power. He has a BS in chemistry and MS in paleontology education from the New Mexico School of Mines and a PhD in multicultural childhood and teacher science education from the University of New Mexico. And he's taught for over 37 years. And it's neat to see the broad range of educational background. He's not just a scientist, not just that, but he's also worked with children and adults in all age groups. So with that, let's welcome Jerry.
Well, I guess, do you need to check anything? Do I need to do it like a robot? I look wired up here. Thank you for the opportunity to do this. And Paul's such a fireball up there at Fort Morgan, and we had a summit last spring, over a year ago. And we had about 15 different creation ministries from around the Kansas area, including Colorado, all of it bordering, and some even down into Texas. We want to include Texas, no offense, please, but anyway. And we had a great time. We had Brian Young come in with his Semisaurus, and at that little tiny town of no more than, probably it has a little college called Barclay College, and without the college population during the year time, there's maybe 200, 300 people. It's a small community. And that community would play a big part in my discipleship, in my being discipled for Jesus. Because as you can read from here, it didn't start in the church. And I will explain that. I won't go through all of this, but I'll hit certain things. And what you're seeing here in front of you, this and this, is what kept, as I would tell my fellow colleagues after I became a Christian, even before I was a Christian, kept preaching at me. Romans 1:20 became a core for me because I realized how true it was where God says, you have to believe in God. You're foolish if you don't, basically, because of what you see around us. And I'm going to show you why. Okay? And so the two big questions that I always get asked is this. Well, when did you become a Christian? Were you a Christian? I tell them I wasn't. I said I knew two facts about the Bible. One of them was there was a guy named Jesus in it. And the other one was somewhere in there was a passage that said something like, the Lord is my shepherd. And I said, I've never darkened the church because my dad was very bitter against the church. He threatened divorce as the intensity of conviction, I'm convinced, came upon him in later life. And I was kind of out of the house, and here I come home with what he called religion. And that didn't set too well, and my dad's favorite sport was boxing. He always had two pair of gloves, and I still remember those red-handled gloves, or those red gloves. And I never saw him use them, but obviously he had before. And then the other thing he taught us, other than that, he would, boxing, and he loved to debate. He was a debater. And here he has a son come home from college from, of all places, a school of mines, geology-oriented, very long-age, philosophy-oriented, with religion, and you can imagine there's going to be some boxing matches, debates, and I'll share that in a little bit. But people ask me, where'd you start? And I said, I didn't start with Christianity. I had two basic facts. But I do remember one other time that I went with some friends, probably about you guys' age. All right, and I wanted to go with them, and I stayed at their house one night, and it was over a weekend, and it had to be in the summer, or I don't know when they were having it, but they were having some kind of little vacation Bible school. I went one day. I don't remember a bit of the message, but there was a song they sang. And even to this day, and I see it almost being, God, your hand's been there, hadn't it? You know what that song was? I may never. But I'm in the. It never left me. Even a little song. A few little bits of scripture. That's God's grace and love, and how much He does care for us. All right? Well, the other question, a little more on the humorous side, is people ask me, how long have you been collecting rocks? That's another big one. How long have you been collecting rocks? And I tell them, well, I can't really tell you how long I've been collecting rocks. But I remember one time I got bold enough to ask my dad a very serious question. And this was probably about not quite that, it probably was about 7 years after, these incidents occurred. But when I was younger, and I got a little bit ornery, Dad, very appropriate, on their very appropriate place, would come up and say, Jerry, stop. And then it graduated to a little stick. And I remember the little, ow, that stings. Finally, at my junior high year, I asked him, Dad, why did you change to this? He said, Jerry, I got tired of hurting my hands on the rocks that were always in your pockets. And I remember going out and collecting. One of the joys I had, we were down by the San Pedro mine southwest of Santa Fe, had a ranch there, and they'd bring in crushed gravel for the road. And it was full of chalcopyrite and the pyrite, the brassy stuff, and the greens and the blues. You'll see some incredible pieces here. And I would always fill in my pockets. And I'm sure my mom didn't find it too humorous either, as she always had to clean out my pockets with rocks. Well, 70-some years now, and my wife's still saying the same thing. I'm still filling my pockets with rocks. You know, and Jim, like you said, you saw my tools, I'm ready. Anytime I see a pretty road cut, I see a pretty rock, I've got to have a sample, you know, and work with it. Well, anyway, those are the two biggest questions. But I want to share just a little bit with you here of what was the biggest factor that brought me to my knees and to the reality of the grand world and the Creator design. And I appreciate the prayer. You used the word wonderful. I couldn't describe it better. And that's what kept preaching at me. Wow. Wow is a shortened form to me of wonderful. And then we get to thinking about it. Are we attributing that wonder to nature? There's animism. Do the people realize that? When you attribute that beauty, that design, and that awesomeness to just natural process, that's animism. You're worshiping nature. So really, when we say wow and wonderful, we say, thank you, Lord, for your wow rocks and your minerals. And I've been underground 2,000 feet or better, roamed around in underground, loved to do it, and seeing it under the ground. Big purple cubes. Can you imagine that being maybe the first person to ever see something like that? And thinking about the beauty that's down there as well. Wow. Well, I'll go on here a little bit with this, and I think this thing advances for me too if I have to. All right, let's see if it does. Quickly, 51, I'm a Valentine's baby. Up at Paul's meeting up at Fort Morgan, I had two people come up. I've never had this happen before. He says, well, we're all Valentine's babies. 3 of us in one room. You know, and I thought, isn't that interesting? You know. But anyway, notice the next one. Somehow I didn't start out life very normal. Little kid, full of energy, blonde, tow-headed, following my great uncle, the pioneer in the group down there for our family, or in the early 1900s he came in, and I come along, and I'm full of energy, Mom puts the clothes on me, and I'm out running, exploring. That's been my life. Well, my Uncle John, great Uncle John, he was a stocky, stout man, an old bachelor. He had a dead tree out in the corral, pine tree, pinyon pine. And he was going out to the corral to chop it down. Guess who's tagging along?
Yeah.
And as I did that, and I don't know if I came up on him and he didn't know I was there behind him or if I'd trailed him out there, but I know he would get hopping mad at times because he always had his cats, and he'd make these cakes look like big thick pancakes, and he'd break it up and put milk, he milked, and he'd put it out in the pans for the cats, and he had dozens of cats. Of course, that's good, you control the rodents. And anyway, I'd come running up just about the time the cats would all be there, and all the cats would just, pew, and he'd get so mad at me, my mom said, and all, so I was trailing him around. Well, he swung back, and I was behind him. The only thing I remember after that was being in his arm a quarter of a mile away. And my head's on this side. And I just remember kind of like, pop. And my dad's standing in front of me, looking. And my uncle looked at my dad, and he was shocked. And they took me and they put me down, and I just began to walk. And my uncle looked at my dad and says, "Gerald, I just knew I killed him." He said the only miracle, and he kind of was religious a little bit, he says the only miracle was I didn't take my double bit axe with me this time. I only had the single bit. I had no pain, no memory loss. I just pop, and there's my dad. My dad will play into this picture bigger because God was there. Because my dad was already bitter and turning the other way from God. And I look back at that and I said, Lord, sometimes we just need to look back and see your hand and what you're doing. So anyway, that's that. And in 1969, as a senior in high school, I call it my Brow the Hill experience, where I was looking at a big pine tree. I always was out in nature walking and observing and everything, and I saw a little flower I'd never seen before, and I thought it was so cool, and a deer out there, and I got to thinking, and I'm being taught evolution, and basically agnostic at home. We just don't mention God. You know, it's never brought up. And I'm out in the middle of the forest doing my usual thing, looking for arrowheads or just enjoying that day, that experience. And I have thoughts as I look at this beauty all around me, and I have the thought that, you know, you couldn't get this stuff to just happen by chance in trillions of years, or even more than that, quadrillions of years. They're too complex. And I'm looking at tree, big pine tree, red bark. Then I'm looking at this little flower, and then that buck standing over there watching me and thinking to myself, and look at this, and I thought complexity and design was just whoo. And then it kind of passed, and I went on, but it never left me. It was preaching at me, telling me, God loves you. He made you and them. And so it goes on, and so I go off to college, and I'm not going to go through a lot of this stuff, but you can imagine I got to college in chemistry, biology, geology. There was nothing spiritual. It was all up here. And I'll make a pointed case here. Ladies and gentlemen, we're not going to convince anybody by changing their mind. You must understand that. You know why? Only God can do that. Where do we work? This influences this. So at college, I realized they were pumping my head with all this knowledge, but they were never touching this here. There was something missing. And that's where nature came in and really was preaching at me. So much so that my colleagues in geology and biology and chemistry come up to me and they found out that I got religion. And then all of a sudden they'd say, isn't this rather strange that now you've been taught all of this, you know, the natural processes, naturalistic processes of millions of years that just happen, you know, and now then you're believing in this God thing, and you're probably reading about it. And I look at them and said, you know what? I was raised on a farm and ranch. And I said I always had puzzles in my mind about systems and design, the engineering I saw. And I said, all of that was preaching to me. And so my only response to what you said is, I thought so. I said, it fit better than anything else. Their response, and they just walk off. They know. So anyway, that was that, and so I thought so. Creator. You know, it was just so natural to me that that was going to be it. All right. So let's see if I get that again there. Whoop, wrong one. Now I got it. The Lord touched me in a powerful way. He told me right away in 1971, there at this college, I would be teaching young people, lots of them. If you can imagine an old farm dude, farm kid, ranch kid, big ranch, I was happy with my rocks. and doing things. Why do I want to deal with people? And to hear this, I'm just sitting here saying, but it was very clear, you're going to be working with lots of young people, and you're going to need Bible training. That I knew. So, but that voice, that inner sense, I now later would find out the Holy Spirit, God's Spirit, working with your thinking, working here. He is renewing the mind now. He's working from here up, from the Spirit up, beginning to transform. You said you're going to be working with lots of young people. You're going to need the Bible. But listen to me, because wherever you go, people are going to hear that you're interested in ministry. You say you ought to go to this seminary, or this seminary. That may be fine. But he says, I want you to listen to me because I have the place I want you to go. Well, eventually, we went to that place. And guess what? God had in that school a professor that was really, really getting tuned in to ICR. And when that professor began to minister to me, my heart just began to ring. And I knew why he sent me there. That's my calling. Kids, families, creation. I know it like the back of my hand. That's why the Lord never would let me focus in on just geology, never just on chemistry, never this. He said, I want you to know a lot of it. And I'm going to teach you to teach others. Share that. So this is that story. And that's what, then I had the lady in the ministry. Jesus touched me and spoke to me, and I'm bringing that all in. But as you can imagine, I went through this. As I first became a Christian, and that's an important point, and hang in there because I'll get to all the pretty rocks and stuff here in a little bit. So you get all excited about it, and you'll get some to take home with you. Well, as I'm reading the Bible, and I'm reading Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, what? He created the heavens and the earth. And so I also was learning enough to know that God says He's all powerful. He's all knowledgeable, omniscient. And He is present everywhere so that He can act at a moment's time as He needs to, everywhere. He's eternal. And I'm wrestling with that and saying, okay, Lord, you're all powerful. I know you could do it any way you wanted to, and you could have done it, in long periods of time. I know that's possible. And then I'm also reading in my New Testament stuff, James 3:1, it says, let not many of you become teachers, because in so doing, you're going to incur a stricter, and it doesn't say just review, it says judgment. That made my knees shake, particularly as I thought about going into teaching, and he's telling me young people, and I'm accountable. Well, modeling is huge. And so I began to fast and pray, and for about 3 months, as I'm praying about this and fasting off and on and just questioning the Lord, Lord, what about this? One day, in my new Old Testament reading, all right, and by the way, in this period of time, first few years, maybe 3 years of my Christian walk, I read the Old and New Testament, Old Testament 22 times. I was so hungry for the Word. I had so much up here, but I had so little here. And I'm reading in Exodus, for my Exodus reading, Exodus chapter 20, or my Old Testament reading. And I'm reading Moses reiterating the 10 Commandments. Comes to number 4. This is with him, not this part yet, with people. He says, keep the Sabbath holy. 4, big word, even though it's little, 3 letters. 4, in 6, what? days I created the heavens and the earth, and on the seventh I rested. Keep this, basically saying, keep this seventh one eternal. It's your rest. And of course, Hebrews, the writer of Hebrews is going to pick up on that. The rest in God that we have to have. God's peace. And so I'm sitting there and I'm reading that, and all of a sudden it's just like inside of me, I just began to whoa, I felt like Job, like the Lord's presence was getting so close to me. And the first thing I kind of sensed in me, I felt like the Lord was challenging me with this question: am I a liar? I mean, it was intense. It was like Job, when God came on the scene with Job and told Job, okay, Job, you've questioned me. Stand up and we're going to talk. And Job's response, boom, he says, I've spoken once, I've spoken twice. I'll speak no more because I've spoken in ignorance. And Job was a righteous man. And we know the end of that story, and I always share with people, we want to use Job, example of Job, but listen to this. Job said at the end, he says, Lord, all I had before all of this was knowledge from my, you read it, hearing. But now I see you with my Romans 1:20. Wow. Well, I'm sitting there and this challenge had come to me, am I a liar? And it's like I was sensing God was challenging, am I a liar now? And I just in my mind, from my scripture, I said, no, Lord, there's no shadow of turning in you. You're the same yesterday and forever. You're eternal. Your purposes are eternal. And the voice, just like this little internal voice came to me and said, well, do you realize that if I told my people to observe 6 days of work, and I did it in 6 million years, 6 billion years, I'm a liar. I tell you what, I burned that bridge and never crossed it again. Now, why is that important? When I go to camp meetings and working with kids, and I run into workers who are working with children, which is my heart, and thinking about a teacher and the accountability we have, I look at that leader and various ones, and they'll come up and tell me, well, I don't agree with you on this. And I said, well, I can't convince you, but I'd like to share with you the story I just shared with you. You know what happens? They'll go back, and I've had them 2-3 months later write a letter to me and tell me, well, I don't think I'm calling God a liar. And I never said, I just talking about what God was sharing with me. And it's telling me, it hit. I can't convince them, but I can share a story. And that's why I think what God gave that to me. So anyway, that's what happened there. You've asked me, am I a liar? And there's been so many other things that have gone on. My brother says, Jerry, you need to write a book. I said, I'm into kids, not into writing books. I'll tell him. And then I went, when I was in Southeast Missouri State University back there and was speaking in the public library and everything, a writer came up to me, and she's a Christian writer, good writer. My wife says she's really good. She says, you need to put this in memoirs and at least get it for your children. And so, okay, it's like the Lord is saying, I'm twisting your arm, you do need to write some of this down. The article that I mentioned earlier about the incredible or the powerful testimony of nature appeared in 1910 in a Nationwide magazine. And I got comments, a lot of good comments from that. And it was talking about my little deer experience that I had that I just kind of quickly shared with you. So anyway, moving on here, and quickly I want to go to the rocks. Let's get to Dad. Remember where I left you with Dad? His eyes are open, or looking at me, is the Lord had just popped my eyes, whether He resurrected me from the dead or whatever. There was something serious that had happened. And my dad is standing before me. Well, now then, I've got religion. I accepted Jesus. Powerful, powerful experience with the Lord that no way to describe it other than I say, it's like God backed up to me with a truckload of love and just let me have it. And He broke up all of that old stagnant stuff and that bitterness and self-righteousness that our family was noted for, and began to just break that up, and fresh water began to flow. And that's what I felt. And that was 51 years ago. And it's still flowing. The life and river of God. Okay? Well, I come home. The Lord sends me home. I had a burden for my dad, a real burden for my dad. My wife would tell you, she said, I would just begin to cry at times when I'd start praying for Dad, because I loved him so. Moral man. But there was the blank, I didn't know what it was. I didn't know exactly what it was that was a block. Later, I'd realized it was a bitterness and anger, and then plus another situation that had occurred in this family, all right, with just him losing his mom, and he'd been mad at his mom and couldn't ask her forgiveness because she died the day that he got so mad at her. She had Bright's disease, kidney disease, and they didn't have a cure for it. And so to be left with that, feeling bitter towards how the church responded to that and some other things in that church at that time, and plus then this feeling that he could never measure up. He could never tell his mom, Mom, I'm sorry, because she's gone. And suddenly I began to understand. But before this happened, I come home, sonny boy, oldest in the family, having religion. And my dad being the what? And he loved to debate. Boy, I tell you what, ran through about 3 rounds of this, 3 or 4 rounds, and I would be working on something and I catch it out of the corner of the eye and I could tell, brace yourself. Here comes the shadow boxing, the debate. And the first time it happened, my dad just, boom, he would get right to the point. He'd ask a question, one question, and then if I tried to respond, and it was another one that was just right at his point. That was just the way Dad was. And first fielding that first round, the Lord spoke to me and said, don't argue, love him. That's all I knew. That's all I could hear him saying. Don't argue, love him. And so I would graciously acknowledge Dad, and I would just say, yeah, Dad, that's, and then I'd back out, and that would be it. That happened 2 more times. And then it came the last time. And I'm leaning over my pickup. I had a yellow Toyota pickup, looked like a yellow chicken, or I don't know what you call it, a blue or yellow bird. But on the back of my bumper, or on the back of my tailgate, I had a green and white sticker that said, Jesus is your best shock absorber. And so I'm just leaning over in my pickup here, just looking at probably some rocks I had in the back I'd picked up somewhere. And I caught Dad coming up the driveway, and I said, get ready. I thought in my own mind, get ready, Jerry. So I just kind of braced myself. Okay, Lord, give me the strength to field the punch. All right. And so I kind of turned around and acknowledged Dad. First words. He points directly at that bumper sticker. He says, Jerry, do you know what they call people who put bumper stickers like that on their car? And I didn't know what he was really pointing to or thinking about. And so I started to answer, and I said, well, Dad, I'm not. And he says, they call them Jesus freaks. And he looks me square in the eyes, and there's his punch. And so I kind of rock for a split second to feel that impact, and then how to just, Lord, love through this. And so I was getting ready to just kind of acknowledge it and back out of the situation, and I felt something very strange inside, at least the beginning of something. And it was like now I'm going to throw my punch. I remember my dad was standing before me when the Lord, whatever he did, brought me to life, healed me. I don't know what he did. All I know is I looked up and there's Dad right there. And as I'm going and I'm thinking about this punch he's just thrown me, about Jesus freak, and the Lord says, I'm going to throw my punch. I've learned to just not try to think too much about it, but let God remember he's the one who's in charge. And he says, whenever you get in these situations, trust me, I will give you the words. Whew. I'm glad. Sometimes I'm too slow thinking. I don't know about you. All right. And anyway, here's what came out. I looked at my dad. I pointed to my heart. And I said, Dad, I know that I'm sure they call them Jesus freaks. That gives you kind of a clue of the time we're in. But I know what Jesus has done in my heart. And Dad just got real quiet. Real quiet. Super quiet. And then he just turned around and walked away. I'm sitting here saying, that was about midweek, Wednesday or Thursday. Sunday night of that week, the church that I had started going to with my wife, the Baptist church there in a little town called Edgewood on I-40, east of Albuquerque, they were holding a revival and had an evangelist in there. Monday night, Dad came. Guys and gals, this is awesome. Pray for your moms and dads. God loves them. He came, and I was just elated that he was there. It's the first time ever for the family. And he came. And the evangelist, typical evangelistic service, the evangelist gave an altar call at the end. And I think one person went up to talk to the deacons and be prayed with. And that was it. All right? But the evangelist kind of prolonged it, which is typical. They have 3 or 4 closings. But anyway, but anyway, a friend of mine, and this was a good thing because a friend of mine who knew me and my dad and was between our ages, slid in next to me and says, Jerry, you think we ought to talk to your dad? And I thought, ooh, you know, Dad will let you as close as he wants to. All right. And I was about ready to again just kind of pass it off. And again, inside of me, it just said, it's like a boldness started coming over me and said, yes. Okay, Lord. And I was sensing it was deep. It wasn't something I was manufacturing or anyone else. It was coming deep within me. So I got out of my pew and I went back and slid next to Dad, and he's standing here. Didn't look him in the eyes. And I just whispered, Dad, wouldn't you go forward at least for Jesus' sake? Those are the first words, or for the family's sake, what I said. Wouldn't you at least go forward for the family's sake? Forget it. So that was his way of saying, back off. You know, he'd fielded a punch. Now the Lord's throwing punches here, and I'm not realizing what's going on here. So I go back to my seat, and I'm just happy that Dad's there. And the whole church knew him, and I'm sure they've been praying for him for a long time. And when the next thing that happened, it was amazing. All right? And so we left that evening. He came back the next night, and ladies and gentlemen, the rest is history. I can't help cry, because God taught us, don't cry. Men are weak if they cry. And men who have to depend on guns are weak. This is how you settle it. So I had to learn how to cry and let that pressure off at times. If you struggle with that, you need to too. It'll kill you before your time. Whoa. So anyway, I'm up there. Dad comes the next night, and I said, this is amazing. What's going on? This is amazing. What's going on? And I'm with my wife in the same place. Dad and Mom were in the same pew, about 2 pews behind us, 2 rows behind us. The altar call comes up, and a little boy, probably, how old are you?
11.
11. He was probably about 9 or 10. He walked forward at the invitation, and then I heard my dad stir. He walked forward, talked to the evangelist. The evangelist then and a deacon came over, and they prayed with him. Oh man, I just sitting here just saying, wow. Started with Jesus Freak. Started with a bumper sticker. And then the next thing happened that just brought me to tears. And I began to weep. Dad pulled out of his pocket an old one of those kind of bandana type things of blue, and it was always blue. And that was his dust mask. And when he was spraying cattle, which in later years that wasn't enough, and it would get his lungs and all, that's what he wore. But he had his handkerchief. He brought it out, and guess what he did? I began to cry. And I remember very specifically turning to my wife, Linda, and said, my Jesus has come to dwell in Dad. And ladies and gentlemen, it was powerful what started happening. God had restored the head of the family. Miracles were just powerful things that started happening. Within a month, the Lord moves me on. I had no clue how God was going to use me. I just know, go home to your dad. And this happens. And now the Lord sends me back to the college. That's another miracle. I won't even share of how that was revealed to us. And my first call from Mom in the student union, and first words, Jerry, guess who's got a bumper sticker on our car? I've only had one bumper sticker. And so people always ask, well, what did it say? God is my pilot. And I won't share the end of the story, but Dad apparently saw angels coming to get him when he passed away. Mom says, I wish you would have been here to see what happened. In his last breathing days. And I said, wow, what a testimony here. All right, well, I went on, did a master's thesis. I've done dinosaur work in the Best Eye, and I tested Job 40 and 41. I shared with the group last night up in Littleton about facing my thesis chairman, all right, and he claimed to be a Jewish atheist. You know, and we had quite a discourse, and I was a little older. I've been around the block a few more than just a student who's getting his first degree or a graduate student. I'd been around a little longer than that. So, and being, I guess, with my dad's boxing, possibly blood and that, I'm a little bolder at times as the Lord leads me. And so we had an interesting thing. And ladies and gentlemen, here's another powerful one. And I feel like I should go ahead and share this one. And that's here, my thesis chairman. The night of my thesis, my defense. Anyway, my professor and I had the chairman, and I had this discussion about my paper that I had to present. And as I tell people, I'd never seen so much red ink on it in my life, on a paper. And that wasn't so much, that was not from correction. Sure, there were corrections, but it was words like this: nonsense. What does that tell you already? Well, for me, this is time for getting the ring, put on the gloves. All right? And so it comes to the final night when I'm before my panel for my thesis, the other doctors and, and specialists. And he asked me a question, and the Lord had already prepared me. Be sure you have this document with you. I handed it to me. He didn't ask me another question. And one thing went to another, and I challenged him. I said, you guys challenge me because I bring in the possibility of short time for fossilization, that it could happen from the studies that I show. If I'd have left it with the millions and billions of years, or particularly the millions of years, you would have never questioned me. I looked at him and very squarely, and here's my punch. I said, that's not science. Science says you put it all on the table, and then you critically think, weigh the evidence. All right? Well, it came time for them to have their little caucus to let me know a little later if it was or this, or more work, or... So they sent us outside, and my daughter went with me, and I'd ask her to help me bring in stuff, because I had quite a bit of stuff to do my presentation. They thought I was going to take 30 minutes. It took 2 hours. So this was a 2-hour bout. And I'm sitting out there. They put us out in the hall, and I asked them if she could come in, and she just sat and watched, and I asked her quietly, I said, Esther, you pray for me through this. And then we were out in the hall, and I had something really unusual happen to me. I'm a very visual person. I don't go by dreams or things like that. But when the Lord speaks, He can do it. And I'm sitting there, and it's like a movie camera goes off with a video on it. And in this video, I see myself being asked by my chairman, can I help you take stuff out? Well, my normal response was, I had Esther. I didn't need, we'd come up. But in this, I just really sensed, let him. I sensed that internal boldness with those words with it. And then the next thing began to happen, and I saw him taking stuff out, walking down to the back of the car, as all of us were, my daughter and myself and my chairman. And then the next thing I saw is him sticking out. It hadn't happened yet. Sticking out his hand of congratulations. And at that, I heard this bold voice, again, kind of almost speaking to me. I could sense it internally, this communication. Put everything down in your hands. Do this and do this. But I knew what I saw. And so that kind of, and they come out and say, we're ready for you, come on in, we've talked. And they didn't share anything, the other professors left. And the movie camera started rolling. He comes up and says, can I help you take out stuff? And like I said before, I just said no. I made some way, Esther helped me with it, that's fine. But I already knew, let him. So I did. We got down to the back of my car, camera rolling, replay, replay, replay. He sticks out his hand. I put my stuff down. I take his hand, and I do what I was instructed. And I thank myself and challenge us. Do we miss the miracle of God's power if we don't follow through all the way? Because what happened next, I cannot explain. Took him by the hand, took him around the shoulder, gave him a hug. And he began to cry. He began to cry. It just got... Jewish atheist. 2 children in the Gulf War at the same time. He had some concerns. His atheism fell apart. You know, and I didn't keep a lot of contact with him afterwards, Dr. Wolberg. But you know what? You've heard this. You may be the only Bible that some people see. And I've tried to learn to be sensitive to the Lord because I've seen the power of it. Not only that with my dad, and then this, and then again and again and again. And I'm dumbfounded because I'm not in total control of it other than just being obedient and listening to the Lord. Okay? And that's what that last story there is. And I'm done here with this, and I'm going to go to the pretty rocks. Are you ready? And I'll talk about what's been speaking to me for such a long time here. And that's the last part. Bear tracks in the Permian. I talked to another scientist who was working on his PhD while I was working on my master's degree. That's a whale of a story too. And my involvement with the New Mexico Natural History Museum, I had an incredible encounter there where they had a huge big display displaying all of the Permian, 280 million years ago, blah, blah, blah stuff and whatever. And they had it, and I would share the real story of the bear tracks in there and tell homeschool groups I was leading through that. And they got wind, and I was doing a Doc Rock show in Albuquerque. A church or a group started sponsoring this, and I had kids coming on, and we were talking on that. And anyway, I took one group of homeschool in, one of the later dates I was doing this, and the next time I went in there, I found out that they had reviewed one of my videotapes where I exposed this, and within that time of about a month, they totally removed that tens and hundreds of $1,000 display. They didn't want to deal with it because in their museum storehouse, the bear tracks are still there, with Dimetrodon, the sailback lizard, and those kind of reptiles that are before the dinosaurs. And here's all of these tracks, and there were bear tracks. Smithsonian, 1992 magazine, this guy that I talked to got it in the Smithsonian magazine, and you can read it. And the journalist says this, those look like bear tracks. And Jerry McDonald, because he was being funded by this, and he and I had talked this one-to-one, and I'm finding out the truth of all of this. And he said, Jerry McDonald said, yeah, but they shouldn't be there. And I've got pictures of that in one of my things here. You can see them. So there's plenty of evidence. Plenty of evidence. All right, one other thing. When I went to the University of New Mexico in my PhD, there's another story, another episode, and the encounters I had there. I was in a sedimentology, graduate level sedimentology class, the layers of the rocks and interpreting. And the professor's up there at the board writing and talking about how we can interpret this layer and all these layers. And while she's facing the board, she says this, and don't give me any of this. I mean, exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point. And I'm an older student, and I'm sitting in the back of the room of all of these younger ones that are getting their degrees in geology, room full. And when she said that, hair kind of went up on the back of my neck, and I real quickly said, Lord, that's a punch. Do I respond to this? And I was praying, and I felt my hand just... And the students, when they saw that, they just got quiet. And the professor said, yeah, what do you want? What's your question? I said, well, you talk about all this interpretation and everything, and you're willing to tie dates to this. What do you do with the helium that is still in some of these rocks that shouldn't be there? I don't want to talk about that. Just like that. And the students are now just ice. And they said, he got her. No, I didn't. God did. And challenged us right there, with that. And that was that episode. And there at the geology department at the University of New Mexico, this is a common thing that I would get from them at times. We know who you are. And we know that you don't believe the way we do. And I said, yeah, underlying belief, please. And then I challenge them, go down in the library here and look at these books, and you can see we can vary the age dates of things. And I had responses like, yeah, I know. And I'm sitting there, then why do you act and go out and you're being bullied? Peer pressured. All right, shut up, Doc Rock, go to the rocks. All right, so I'm going to just leave that there. And let's go to the rocks. Here's what was testifying to me all the time. Let's start here. Now, I need you to respond to this. We've got to quit being spectators. That's one thing, being salt of the earth and the light of the world. Quit being spectators. You've got to act. When you do that, God is able to more easily work with you. Like practice makes perfect. Okay? What's your favorite color? Let me see what this one is. Anyone like green? Raise your hand if you like green. Is that your favorite color? Yeah, let's all be kids. That's what God says. We're His children. How about that? I'm going to leave these out, and when you come up and look at them, don't pick them up, but feel free to touch them. That's what they're for. That's malachite. That's out of the Morenci copper pit in Arizona. I've collected a lot of these. Here's another green one that's from Africa. And that's more stalactite, bubbly stuff on the bottom of an open space where the copper was dripping and building up, and you got layers. They were getting ready to butcher this one for jewelry. And I saved it, rescued it. Oh, what about this color? I bet I have more of this one than I have of green. Blue. How many blues? Okay, yeah. Well, let's look at the blue. And this is a copper mineral called azurite. Again, Morenci copper pit. I had a rock that was twice the size of this table. It was covered with these, and all I could get off of was those two pieces. If I'd had a big crane, I'd brought the whole thing home, like that. Well, what about pink? You like pink? Well, there's a pretty pink. That's a rose quartz. All right, what else have I got here? This has got a lot of yellow and mixed with brown in it, and I rescued this one from being jewelry. They put this in rings and bolo ties, but this was an asbestos at one time mineral that was replaced by quartz. Asbestos is a quartz mineral, fibrous quartz mineral that can cause problems. You think about it, quartz, fiber in our lungs, not a good thing. Well, it's got hit heavy with quartz again, and it stabilized it, and look at that. And so they cut it and to make jewelry out of it, and that's called tiger eye quartz. Well, what else have I got here? Well, talk about another pink one. Look at this one. Now down south of you, in the Taos region, south of Taos, all right, there's a mine called the Harding Mine. That was a frequent place I'd take students and families and groups and myself to go up there and collect. There is a mine where one room is about half the size of this and it's fully as high. And the walls are white like this, but if you can imagine, it's just streaked with the pink all through it. And what's significant about that, that's lithium that's giving the color, the metal lithium. And that one, where these are coppers here. Copper metals. All right, what else? Well, let's see if you recognize where we see this. all the time. Where do you see that color? It's called the red metal, copper. That's native copper out of Michigan with the host rock with it, but native copper. Big masses of it in the Michigan, Lake Michigan and that turf, big hunks of it in that area, which is fascinating as far as studying how that occurred, all these metals. So there's copper. Well, let's see what else I've got here. Here's one, I think it's peacock color. Yeah, it is. Peacock colors. It's got blues, bronzes, like this. And that's a 38% copper ore. The weight, by weight, 38% is copper. So it'd be this stuff. But it's combined with sulfur and iron. And we can get this. I've mined this in the San Pedro mine there in northeast of Albuquerque. All right. Let's see what else I've got here. How about a bright pink? That's a pretty bright pink. I wish I had a bigger piece of that. And all that's a calcite mineral. Then we have black. Those are black garnets rich in iron, and we have red ones that are pigeon blood red. Some of you have jewelry that has garnets in it, the red ones typically. We have green ones, and there are a few that are pretty rare that are blue. All right, garnet is what they use on sandpaper, the grit they put on sandpaper to use for sanding, because it's hard, hardness of around 8. All right, a little harder than quartz itself. So there's a pretty black one, and like I say, if you come up, touch them, but don't lift them up. Then I go to this one here. What is this one? Well, this one's kind of a dark one too, a different metal. The dark brown material here is zinc. It's a mineral called sphalerite, zinc sulfide. And this one here, now listen to this word and see if you can figure out how we might be able to use this. Zinc we use in batteries, we use all kinds of zinc. So this is the ore for zinc, sphalerite. These purple ones are called, listen carefully, fluorite. What does that sound like we might be able to use?
Toothpaste.
What?
Toothpaste.
Good job. Fluoride and toothpaste and water and stuff. So we can get the fluoride, which is just a derivative from the fluorite, and they process it. And of course we get it and we use it for other things, in paints, explosives, various other things. It's a flux, you know, in various things. So that one's fluorite. Now then, this one leads me into the next category over here on the left. This one everybody always, wow. And Colorado has a lot of this. Anyone ever been to Climax? You know what's up there? Climax mine, right? And they were mining molybdenum. Very important metal for hardening steels and stuff like this. Okay, well, at times within that molybdenum body that they find, they would run into things like this. And that's fool's gold, the shiny stuff, metal, just iron and sulfur. The white stuff is barite, a barium, sulfur, and oxygen, barium sulfate. But isn't that pretty? You think you'd take some of those home if you found some? Yeah, you know, I would too. I'd fill my pockets full and all. So that's pretty cool. You guys would probably do the same thing. You bet I'd take some of that. Well, I don't think I have any of this, but I've got some pretties for you guys, you know. All right, well, I'll come to this. This is kind of my unusual group here. I want to come over here and deal a little bit more with this. So let me look at this one. Here's another one, but I'm going to shape here. So here's color. God is colorful. Light, the amazing properties of light. Now we go to shapes. Here's a cave formation. Look at that. That's a quartz mineral, probably from Brazil. That's citrine quartz. What's this one? Oh, this is another one of those, but it's kind of different in that it's got pyramid shapes, where this one is a little different shape. You can imagine You know, the varieties that you can get. Well, let's see what else I've got here. Anyone know what that is?
Crystal.
It's a quartz crystal. Yeah, crystal. That's right. That's a clear one. This one's from Peru, Sierra de las Cruces, meaning the mountains of the cross. There in Peru. Very clear. All right. And this one I dug on Ruidoso, New Mexico, Sierra Blanca. And I look at that in the light, and I've got purple phantoms and lines showing its growth lines in it. Fairly rare. But that's all natural. Remember, these are all natural shapes. Nobody's cut them. Nobody's shaped them. All we did is dig them and clean them. Okay. Well, how about this one? It's a quartz crystal too, and this one comes out of Arkansas.
Like a real crystal.
Wow, yeah, a real one. And this one has two ends. We call it double terminated. Two ends to it. It was in the middle of the pocket, and it had plenty of room in the mud that it was growing in to just keep growing three-dimensionally until all of the silica was depleted out of the wet solution that was in this mud or whatever. Okay, so that's a quartz crystal, a double terminated one. All right. But this one.
That's small.
And I have it specially wrapped up because I keep them all wrapped because they keep their value that way. I don't want to lose my value. But look at this.
It's cool. It's square.
You got a tale about this, don't you, Jim?
I do. I picked up one of those once, and I wondered just how square it really was. So I took my engineer square, and I put it to the pyrite there, and it was exactly 90 degrees. That's the way God makes things.
You got that testimony. Not made by man. And I would try to convince people and kids everywhere, they just, surely somebody cut that, surely somebody polished it, and somebody shaped it. And I said, no. And it gives me an ideal opportunity to probe that mind a little bit, dig a little deeper, and challenge them. Well, to do that, I had to buy another specimen of that. And that's this one.
What?
Not very pretty, is it? But watch this. Whoa. There it is. It looks like crystals in concrete. Guess what? Climax had some of these too. The biggest one I've seen from this location is 7 inches. Smithsonian has one, and that brings me to the one over here, coming up next, here. And I have this one really wrapped. Yeah, I want to keep this puppy warm and safe, and, you know. Old blankets sure come in handy. When I come in and talk to kids a lot of times, and I bring out my backpacks and I'll put a backpack on them, those who want to come up and put hard hats on them like they're going with me. And then I'll pull out of the backpack stuff like this of what I use to wrap stuff. And when I start pulling out dirty socks, they really start, our old socks, they start looking, and then they really go, ah! And then laughing when I pull out diapers. They are perfect. Control the moisture, you can seal them off, they're soft, and you can wrap it around there. I said, they're perfect. Wow, watch this one. God has a abstract art too, I think. Look at this. Now people, one of the questions, and you be sure and ask me, somebody can, how does that form that way? I can tell you. God did it first of all, but the easiest way that I can start it with is saying, by laws of chemistry and laws of physics. And you can't have laws unless you have a what? Lawgiver. Otherwise you end up worshiping nature. And that's where this crystal movement, when I talk to people in the crystal movement where, oh, you know, and they're getting all of this energy and stuff out of various crystals, I challenge them, says, why don't you worship the one who made it rather than this? And they look at you real strange, but I think it hits the point. Okay? Worship the one who made them. It gets them to thinking there's somebody greater. All right, well, getting close here. Now that's a quartz crystal. Watch this one. And you guys watch this. Would you guys like to go and find a spot? You look in the wall like I did when I was about your age, and I saw this hole in the wall in a mine, and I went up and looked inside of that hole, and this was what the hole was filled with. I looked in that, and I remember, just like you, I go, wow, shining my light in that tunnel and looking in that hole is like a geode. It's like a jewelry store. I can still see me walking up to that hole. Wow. And my grandmother had a gunny sack on her back full of rocks. She was having a ball too. Okay? So isn't that pretty? Yeah. All right. Well, I'm about getting down towards the end here on these. Here's a different one. It's not real shiny, but look at the shape.
Ooh, that looks like roses.
You've got it. Some people call them desert roses, various things like that, and there's various kinds of desert roses. The most common desert roses are made of gypsum, which is what they use to put here. It's a fire retardant. They grind it up, and it's a white powder. They press it. All right, put the sheet on it, the hard cardboard, and then we use it for sheetrock. Those are barium. That's barite. This is from Norman, Oklahoma, out on the road cuts out in the country, southeast and south of Norman, Oklahoma. And you find these nuts, some of them like that, the bigger the better, and then most of them are about the size of a golf ball or a little bigger. And they just look like a sandstone rock, gritty sandstone. But you take those home and you put them in a bucket and let them soak in water for 3 days or so. That softens the sandstone. Then you take a wire brush, and guess what? Bingo. Now the wire brush didn't create them. They were already in there. At the museum, and you probably remember some, I got clusters, you know, of these. Beautiful, beautiful. Okay? Last one on this one. All of you have heard of heavy as lead? What did we use lead for? Any idea? Okay, we used it for hunting bullets. We used to use it for babbitt, for bearings. A lot of uses of lead. And then we had lead pencils. Have you ever written with a pencil before? And you guys? Now, did you ever put a pencil in your mouth? Yeah, I did too. I liked the paste. You know, and like that. I remember those days. But here is a lead crystal. Now lead, we quit putting lead pencil. We went to graphite. And because lead in the body is a heavy metal poison, and it's hard to get rid of the stuff, like mercury and lead, and there's other things like that. Okay? They've come up with a better medical process today to help people who were miners with this. And usually it's, how does that occur? Is when they blast, the temperature gets so hot and there's fine dust in the air, you can pick up stuff like this. Well, here's a lead crystal. Look at the shape again. That's a natural lead crystal. Now that one, you can see, is not 90 degrees. And rarely do you get, once in a while you'll get a 90-degree lead. Pyrite much more often, but not on the lead and all. Well, let's go to the unusual stuff here. And boy, you'll like this one. So I take this interesting rock, and I'm going to do something here with it, round and round. This is the other half of it, and I'm going to put them back together because I cut them apart. And I want you to look what's inside. It's heavy. Looks like a ball. Almost. Not quite a geode that we think of. A geode is hollow, and it would be lighter weight. This one is like a geode, but it's full. Now I could polish that, and it's kind of a bluish gray. This is called a thunder egg. And so you go to Utah, Arizona, New Mexico. There's various places around the world and other places in the States where you find stuff like this, and they're highly sought after. Some of them have color in them, which are really awesome. So that's a thunder egg. But the one we like to find is the one that's round like that, but it's not heavy. And when it's not heavy, the chances are you might get something like that. Now this is your geode. Any of you got one of these like this? Good job. Good job. This is one thing I'm working on right now in our museum, is to build a collection of geodes so people come in and just look at them and see God's wonders there. All right? So geodes, put these two here together, and that one. Here's another one. Now this is like your cathedral that you have at your house, Jim, but this is a small one. And so the geodes sometimes don't have to be round like a ball. Here's one that's not. And you go to a lot of stores, you'll see these big. You go to the Denver Gem and Mineral Show, you'll see these big. They call them cathedrals. And most of these are from Brazil or Peru. But I have found them in New Mexico, and I'm sure in Colorado there'll be places where you find the amethyst quartz in pockets like this. All right? In the San Juans and the West Slope area where there's been volcanic activity. All right? Here's a funny one. Look at this one. And again, you've got one of these. Jim, you and Karen have an awesome one. Now, that doesn't look very pretty, does it? Nope. But can you see something happening there as I turn it? My wife says I always like to keep people in suspenders, but that's part of the fun of telling the story. You see any green or blue there? Cool. Now you watch when I bring this back. Now you watch these guys over here when I show them what the other side is. You ready? I've got some blue and bronze. You guys got a lot of green and blue and everything in yours. They have one that stands about this tall. It's awesome. Crazy thing, pure variety of a family member of this group of minerals. This is a feldspar mineral they use for making false teeth, and they make it for glazes around pottery. It's hard enough. But look at that. Isn't that pretty? The light effect on that and reflection. That's awesome. This one is called labradorite. It's a feldspar mineral called labradorite. Some people down in our turf call it bitonite.
You didn't polish it.
Is there just one more?
I didn't polish it, but it has been polished. Oop. It has been polished. Let me get my tag back on here.
Okay.
Is that pretty?
No.
No. Well, I got one more. Here, excuse me. And you, front row, get the first to hold it. How many of you have seen a falling star before? Now you get to handle one. A meteorite. I did at the University of New Mexico, and for the Indian school, SIPI there, that I taught at for a number of years, I was involved with NASA and as well as the National Science Foundation, training Navajos and all the Indians that came in on how to identify meteorites. Became a big interest. And so we would do all kinds of tests, all the way to final test would be take it to the big scanning electron microscope that magnifies thousands of times. And we were looking for one element in these rocks, so to speak, and that element was nickel. Iron and nickel. The iron would be common. You can't rule it out. We've got iron all over the place on Earth. Iron and magnesium, iron and oxygen, iron and this, iron and that. But rare do you find anything just iron and nickel together. But guess what? The percentage of those coming out of space on the metal meteorites is high in nickel. And so that would always be a pretty positive 95, 98% proof you got a meteorite. Now you got to hold it. It's going to be heavy. Are you ready? Okay. Is it heavy? Yeah. You're holding a falling star. So pass it down the road to Dad there and everybody else. And just pass it around. And please, the last person, you can bring it back up. Otherwise, I'll get my metal detector out and make sure it doesn't go out that door and not up here, okay? Of course, they use metal detectors a lot to do this. And back in Kansas, where we are, there at Kansas, west of the museum, is a meteorite field called the Brenham-Haviland Meteorite Field. And it has the unique meteorite that has the green crystals in it. And that's pretty unique. But maybe one of these days I'll get my big metal detectors out and go do some stuff, but most of them that they've found have been found under about 13 feet. Okay, well, whoop, now I knocked the other one off. That one's about as pretty as the other one was. Okay, get it up there. Any questions about the mineral real quick? Because I'm going to move a little bit over to this stuff, and then I want to be sure and give stuff away. Would you take a rock if I give it to you? You think so? What about you guys? If I gave you some pretty rocks, would you take them? Well, I'm going to tell you it's not going to be any of these. All right.
He wants all of those.
Yeah, I'm sure he does. You'd have to hand me about $10,000 for it, too, because that's about what's on that table. With the meteorite being the most expensive one and that big pyrite multiple right underneath it and all. Yes?
How do you identify a rock that looks like nothing, that you know when you cut it open it's going to be something?
The details. Does it have bands? Does it have a place that looks different to all the others? Like maybe there's geode something there, it's different color? I look for the specks that are in it. What colors of specks do I see in it? But banding a lot of times is a big one. And then the next thing is, and most of us, as this comes around, where is it? It'll be coming around, is this. We call this in geology specific gravity, or heft is the simple word for it. When you pick up a rock that is super heavy and you compare it to a similar one like this, and you get one that's super heavy, I'd bring it home. If you didn't know this, and you remember, some of you old enough remember the name Howard Hughes? Billionaire? Do you know how he became a billionaire? Just exactly the question you asked. He was out in a mining area there in Nevada, and the story goes, I know the rest of it's true, but how true this part is, I don't know. It says he saw an interesting black rock. And just, he was going along, probably bored or whatever, and he went to kick it. And it did not move. And he said, what? And he picked it up, and it was heavy. So he decided to take it back in and have it analyzed for why it was so heavy. What metal turns black, all right, when it tarnishes?
Silver.
Pardon?
Silver.
Silver. That's where he made his money. He went back in with refined and better technology, worked all the mine dumps, and boom. That's happened here in Colorado at times, too. Reworked the tailings pile or the trash pile for the metals. Okay? What do you think about that heavy dude? Pretty heavy. You guys be sure and get it up there. Yes, Jim?
Are most of those kind of things magnetic? I mean, can you put a...
Yes,
magnet?
yes, they are. And that's one of the first tests you test for a meteorite, and a good question is will a magnet stick to it? Even if it's not real strong, you still feel it because there can be centers that are magnetic and others that are not. And so you can feel that pull just like magnets. But that's not foolproof because there's iron ores that are also magnetic, like hematite, if there's enough iron with it. So you have to go to other tests, and one of them is looking at the surface, and what we trained in. What does the surface, does it look melted like? Does it have those bubble appearances called regmolyps? And then other things, fusion crust and stuff like that. All right. And then the final test typically is put it under the machine and look for the nickel signature. Yes, sir.
On meteorite, you've got the verse from Joshua chapter 10.
Yeah.
The valley in Israel, I was watching a video of that, and where it says the stones from heaven came down,
Listen to this.
that area is full of meteorite fragments.
Did you hear what he said? That's why that's on there. People will ask, because that valley is where God met the Sennacherib's army. Or no, it was the Amalekites that were fleeing from Joshua's when it was. And it says that more men were wiped out by the stones that God sent from heaven than the swords of Joshua's men. And people try to say there's no science in the Bible. I challenge him with that, and that's why that's on there. To think about, meteorites are part of God's picture, and you're going to see it in Revelation again, too. Okay? Let me quickly talk about these. I'll go through this. We're going to take our break here. As soon as we're done here, take our break, and then if we have more questions, you know, we can do it then. So it gives you time to gel a question to ask. Now, the only ungel part will be my answer, probably. All right, with that. And also, I want to be sure and do a final thing with us, kind of our close-up with this, where I give you guys rocks, and I've got one other little final activity, and I'll be done. Well, what I have on fossil stuff here, and I have many more in the car, but I didn't want to put them all out because I knew we could abide our time and have a good time with it. And typically with students, I'll do workshops. If you guys ever need somebody to come up, I help them build, and you want to do that, build rock kits where we take a Coke flat, and I've got it where I cut it just right, and I give them the pattern, we cut it, and they can fold it up, use the circles of the Coke cans in there, put a little label underneath it, and I give them the specimens that they can put their specimen in it. They can fold it up, and it fits perfectly on the bookshelf. That way moms are happy. Don't have this mess of rocks everywhere. They've got it on a bookshelf. And I love doing that, working with the kids, building rock kits. Well, anyway, on the bone part, these two here, if they were real, I couldn't do this. But these are casts. This one's from a cast off of real bone from the Mammoth Hot Springs site in Hot Springs, South Dakota. We take groups up there, family groups, frequently talking about Ice Age effects and what caused this rather than the old interpretation they try to give. All right? This one, a little heavier, is the upper limb. By the way, this one here is, that bone is called, that articulation surface is called the acetablium, and you have one right there. So that's a leg bone. There's another leg bone showing you the difference between dinosaur and mammal. This is mammal, that is mammal, this is dinosaur, this is a duckbill. And it's a limb up here too. So structure different and all, but this one is a cast as well, but a better cast and a heavier one. And this one is from, I think, the West Slope, out in that area there or into Utah. And then this came from our ranch down in New Mexico, and I've got a number of these from Kansas. That's a mammoth tooth. Again, come over and touch these. I ask that you don't lift them, but touch them. You can see the enamel here. This is my great uncle who hit me with the axe, you know, accidentally, was also one who discovered this and had no idea what it was. And many years later, when I got interested in science, and the teacher said, you got to do a science fair project, and I come home to Dad, and Dad's going, what do we do? Any of you have been in that situation? And Dad says, all of a sudden, wait a minute, I remember something. He takes me down in an old granary, and he pulls out this box that has a hand-forged clasp, It'd been there for a long time, and he pulls this out, and he had no idea what it was, and part of the jawbone was in it. And he shared a story about my great uncle finding it after a flood in a creek bed and all. And that's a big mammoth tooth. Mammoth tooth there, it's flat molar surface. The mastodon, also an elephant, and mast means teeth or nippled. So it's very nippled, much coarser diet. This here, be sure you handle that. What do you think that is? Wood. Looks like wood. What if I told you it's a tooth?
That's big.
That's big. Well, you don't have teeth exactly like this, but do you know what these are called here? Hey, that's kind of a good transfer question there. We don't grow them that long, but that's these teeth on a mammoth. And we call them a tusk, don't we? A tusk. So come and look. That's real ivory there. This is out of Oklahoma, just south of us. And then this one's notorious. Anyone familiar with the term meadow muffin? Pasture patty? Pasture cookie? What am I talking about? Doo-doo. And I close with this story and we'll take our break. How'd they come up with, this is dinosaur doo-doo. How in the world did they ever identify that? Somebody had to look into some details. Well, over in Utah, where they started finding stuff, and that one's from Utah, west of us here, there's probably stuff in western Colorado on the west slope as well, in the Badlands, certain places. Anyway, they would find broken rocks. Some of these broken, and they're filled with agate, quartz mineral, and some of them will have reds and stuff like that in it, and they're very pretty. And I've got some polished pieces of that. I actually have a good poo collection, anyway, at the museum. We go through. And so, anyway, we're there, and and they polish it, and they'll polish it up, and if they don't know what to do, they put it in bolo ties and rings and stuff like this. So can you imagine wearing polished poo? Well, a geology guy came up, and he got to looking at it, and he probably bought what they call the cabochons, which typically go, in the bolo tie. And he was real curious, and then he asked the fellow, he didn't want to destroy what he had because he's looking at it with what they call their loupe, looking at it because he's suspicioning something. And he asked the guy for some samples from the cuttings, and the guy said, yeah, I have some. He says, I'll get some for you. Well, the geology guy took it back to the lab, and we'll look at it real carefully under microscopes and did some other things to it. Started finding seed parts, plant parts, bone parts, and it dawned on him, this is fossilized doo-doo, dinosaur stuff. So that's a big dinosaur pasture cookie, or whatever. Now, you know what I do, like he just reacted to it there. I have a mammal one, I didn't bring it in, that I found south of Albuquerque, and it looks like Fifi went out in the backyard, or Poodle, and did her number, and you got this, looks like a Tootsie Roll. It's exactly what it looks like, a brown Tootsie Roll. And I take it into the classroom like you guys are there, and I'll bring it out and I'll show it. And say, what do you think that looks like? And I've had people say, kids say, croissant roll? And then as I keep kind of give them time, wait time to interact with it, they look at it, and pretty soon I see some of them start going. And I look at them and say, I think you've got it. And to see if they've really got it, I'll take that thing and I'll go, or I'll go, and they go, yuck! I said, I think you've got it. So I've got my poo varieties as well. Okay, let's go ahead.
We'll take about 10 to 12 minutes to get a chance to look at all the stuff that he's brought here, and then we'll come back and do Q&A. So take your time and look at things, and then we'll come back.
Yeah. And the only thing I ask, don't lift them up.